So it was really wonderful hearing the energy in the room about cars and hearing how BMW is taking these new technologies already and seeing that these technologies will make the company to transform itself completely. I mean, think about it from the perspective of 10 years ago. If you heard a car company saying, in essence, we're not really going to be selling cars anymore, we're going to be providing mobility services. And when we look at the rest of the changes which technology has already been bringing to us, it is quite transformative. And when we see these technologies, we start asking ourselves, well, does the power of Silicon Valley, do the changes of technology also allow us to start addressing some of the largest challenges that we have when we're looking at the global grand challenges in the world? So Singularity University is a place where people came together, people from Silicon Valley, for the most part, entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, saying, can we use the ideals of Silicon Valley, some of the background assumptions about small teams and pivots and apps and all the rest of it, and apply them to the largest problems that we have in the world, the problems of lack of access to clean water, the problems of lack of access to reliable energy, all the way up to the those are problems which affect 1 billion people, but also the problems which affect everybody on Earth. How do we get the education and the continuing education to be able to keep up with the changes that we're dealing with? How do we deal with global climate change, and how do we start making the changes that we need to make now in order to prevent quite a lot of catastrophe 100 years from now in the time of our children and our children's children? So Singularity University said, we need to be a place where people can come together from all around the world. We have a program going on right now where we have 80 participants from 35 different countries, bringing people together from a wide variety of backgrounds. And a wide variety of backgrounds is both socioeconomic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, to be able to say that if you're going to work on problems and if you're going to find new solutions to problems, you're going to need an interdisciplinary approach. Now, being interdisciplinary is something that people talk about a lot. Oh, we're going to have innovation. We need to bring people together. We need to have innovation. We're going to have fresh ideas. But if you're going to be interdisciplinary, it means that everybody in the room is going to be in part a beginner. Everybody to be interdisciplinary needs to be able to say, I'm a beginner at what you do, and I can help you. How many people here feel comfortable saying something like that? Yeah, I'm not familiar with what you're doing, but I think what I've been learning in my own area applies directly to you. This is not something that we're used to saying, but if we're approaching problem solving at the largest scale, we have to get used to saying that. And so at Singularity University, we've created a space, a test bed for these ideas where people can work on it in small groups. You know, it's a think tank, but it's also a build tank. We don't want people just to study exponential technologies, people who've already been working on global grand challenges and then are going to apply these new technologies to the global grand challenges. We want people to build. We want people to form small teams and then to create ideas which have the potential for helping 1 billion people. So I want to go into exponential technologies. Now, this is actually an example of a very linear technology being played on an exponential technology. I mean, 2048 looks like it's potentially exponential because you have numbers going up 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, all the way to 2048. But it's not an exponential technology. It changes linearly. It takes just as much time. It doesn't get faster and faster the higher the numbers go. It's slow. You're still adding in things 2 and 4 at a time. No, the nature of an exponential is something that speeds up immensely. Now, when we hear about exponentials, we often see them in the form of chart. This is probably one of the more famous ones. It's saying, you know, for a given sum of money, how much computing can you buy? And what this means is 110 years ago, you know, say for the equivalent of 1,000 euros, you could buy, say, a computer for a year. And by a computer, I mean a person whose job was to compute. And over time, we started having mechanical devices which allowed you to be able to then start doing the work that it would normally have taken one computer a year, a human computer. Suddenly that work is done in a month, and suddenly that work is done in a day. And then it switches over a little bit. Instead of being able to get a human equivalent, you're able to do the work of 10 computers. You're able to do the work of 100 computers. At some point, the word computer no longer even means a human computer. It just means we switched over. It's no longer analog. It's a digital computer. And it keeps on going. So when you look at a chart like this, if you imagine that the 0 point on that one is sort of one person being able to work for a year and how much computation they could do, by the end point where you're having 1,000 million times more powerful computing, you are talking about the level of computing that you could get if you had everybody on the human race deciding to work on some computing for 1,000 years. And you're dealing with a computer which can do that in a day, in an hour, in a minute. It's an unbelievably vast amount of computing, which just changes. So yeah, we've moved from this world of thinking about computers and is a computer equivalent to a human computer to how many billions of computers would a computer be? And so this is the world of supercomputers. And again, this is another chart that we would often see, not quite 25 years of changes in supercomputing. And what's worth looking at here is not the names and the numbers of it, but just, you can see in 1990 there's a certain amount of power, and then it's going on, and by 2017, 2018, we're going to have the first exaflop supercomputer. What does that really mean? Well, the fastest supercomputer in the world in the early 1990s now, the computers that cost $300 million and use the electricity of villages, the ones which would dim nearby towns whenever they turned them on. The red circle here, that is what each and every one of you has. Your cell phone. You can't directly compare a cell phone to a supercomputer, not as massively parallel, but still it's sort of equivalent to it. Everybody in this room has a cell phone which is faster than the fastest supercomputer in the world was. And then that next circle is what your laptops, what your computers, what your desktops have access to. What we have in our hands is as fast as the fastest supercomputers in the world were 15 years ago. That's pretty amazing, because that trend is continuing, which means that if you're looking at the year 2024, then our cell phone or handheld equivalents will be as fast as the fastest of computers of 15 years ago, and our desktop computers or the cloud services that we get will be as fast as the fastest supercomputers in the world today, the 20 petaflop supercomputer. This is a fairly large change, but again, this is numbers, this is chart. What does this look in human terms? Well, let's look back to 1997 when people were putting together a model of the world and combining information from satellites and building a model. In 1997, this would have looked pretty good, but years later, today, when we're able to do models on today's supercomputer, you're having things which are much, much more detailed. I mean, look at it again to our eyes, to the eyes of somebody who wasn't going through the computers of 1997. This looks like a cartoon. This is a model of Hurricane Sandy. And so this is what you have available at your home. If you're working on global grand challenges, if you've got a company, you can be doing this level of calculation, and you can be looking forward to slightly into the future being able to use your home computers to do what today would take a really large team to be able to work on. This is quite powerful. Now, of course, you'd be saying, OK, well, I can look at this data, and I can do the computing at home, but this one used a lot of satellite data. And even today, it's going to take a government to be able to get me satellite data, correct? Well, no, not even more. This is a group, Planet Labs in San Francisco. They've been working together on building small satellites, and these satellites only cost a few $100,000 instead of $1 billion, the way that it is today. So this is a fairly interesting development. Now, today, specifically, July 21st, it's the 45th anniversary of our starting to come back from the moon. And, for somebody like me, who's a real big space geek, it's just a heartwarming moment. And you think about going to the moon and humans sending, well, humans to the moon, of course, but sending robots to the moon. And who sends robots to the moon? Well, you've got the United States, you've got China, you've got Russia. And now that it's 2014, you've got my friend Bob. Now, Bob is one of this. Bob has a company called Moon Express. They are one of the competitors in the Lunar X Prize competition, and he's hoping to be able to send a robot and win this competition. This is different. This is new. The idea, when Kennedy said, let's go to the moon, the first of the moonshot projects, he said, we're going to do this because this is hard. Nowadays, you can have people contemplating sending a robot to the moon and doing it because it's fun. These are new tools that we have for ourselves. So when you're looking at what does this all mean, we've got these exponential technologies. How would it actually apply to working on global grand challenge, for example? there's so many applications, but I just want to go over two of them. One of which is what's going to be happening this decade. One of the things that's going to be happening this decade is this is going to be the decade where we have a conversation of all 7 billion people on Earth. Now, how is it that we're going to be having this conversation of all 7 billion people on Earth? Well, one way is we're getting close to a point where everybody is going to be connected. Everybody in the world, every school in the world has the ability to have a keyhole on the rest of the world for people to be able to start talking to each other. And talking to each other in a way which is no longer stopped by the barriers of language or location, because real-time translation is coming. If you look at Skype Microsoft, just this year, they're announcing real-time speech-to-speech translation in Skype. This is new, this is novel. Yes, it's in Skype right now, but the technology has this way of growing, and something that needs to run in the cloud right now will get to the point where it's running on your devices. And within a few years, everybody is going to be having those devices. So the idea of people not being connected to the world is going to be disappearing, which means that every person on Earth is going to have a window on the world. Now, in some cases, this window is going to be a little bit cloudy. There's other people who have a very large window on the world. But either way, even if you have a 2G system, if your 2G system connects to the cloud and you have the ability to ask a question, just a text message, and have the powers of Watson behind it, sending you the answer back, this is going to be a level of connectivity. This is going to be a conversation of all 7 billion people on Earth. Now, what's one of the driving forces behind this? Because you can say, oh yes, in the city regions we've already got connectivity, but what about rural areas? Well, there's a competitive landscape. Google, Facebook, other companies saying that we want to be able to do that last kilometer connection. They want to be sending balloons and planes and other things at very high altitudes that will be able to give at least the equivalent of 2G. And 2G is enough to give us quite a lot of the world. So that's one thing that's just happening just in the next few years, this conversation of all 7 billion people on Earth. Another interesting change which is happening now, just in the next few years, this is going to be the decade where we all discover our superpowers. And by superpowers, I mean all of us have talents that we thought about, maybe when we were in school, oh, should I become a physicist or should I become a pianist? Should I learn French? Should I not go into languages? What is it that I should do? But once you make a choice, it's very difficult to figure out what are you going to do next. But we have a driving motivation to be able to help people discover who they are as quickly as possible. If you think about the world today, where you have many countries which have only recently reached the Millennium Development Goals for universal primary and secondary education, that means you have a series of countries where many adults have had a very substandard education. And the people who are adults who haven't had a good education have the greatest need and the least amount of energy and resources and time to be able to get that education. Well, because of MOOCs, because of these other new tools, because of the quantified self stuff that people are doing for fun in richer nations, they're going to start giving us the tools to be able to help discover, given you and how you learn, if you need to learn how to read, here's the best way to start doing it. And here's some people you can talk to. Here's a person in another country who can teach you. Again, you're not separated by the barriers of language. To be able to connect people with the method of learning and connect people with the teachers in a way which we've never seen before. And as we do this, as we discover how to learn, we are going to be discovering who are the best teachers, who are the people who you might be able to only teach 1,000 people how to do what you're doing, but if those 1,000 people are scattered around the world, but that doesn't matter anymore. Your superpower as a teacher, your superpower of a learner is going to be something that we bring together. So those are just two examples, the conversation of 7 billion people and everybody discovering their superpowers, which we are going to be working with in the next 5 years. And with that, we're going to be going and having a workshop where we talk about, again, two small technologies, autonomous cars and the sharing economy, and how much these two technologies are going to be able to reshape the cities and our communities. So with that, I really want us all to be able to see what are the powers of exponentials, not the tools themselves, not the exponential curves themselves, but what are the capabilities which they're giving us? Because everything that we're talking about today, the companies which are having to radically transform themselves, people who are looking into changing, people who are saying, do I retire at 65 or am I going to retire at 110? all of these have an underlying factor, which is exponential technologies. And the more we understand them, the more quickly we are going to be able to use them and take them and apply them to working on our global grand challenges. Thank you.